Thank you for being here in what is now the first event of this pavilion in COP28. My name is Gretel Aguilar, and I am IUCN, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, Director General. It really brings me a great joy to be here and to open this very first event of the IUCN Pavilion. Our pavilion, as you can see, is called Unite for Nature, because it is exactly what we are doing, bringing our members, partners, experts all around the world, and friends together, unite for nature. IUCN was established in 1948, almost, today I will say almost 75 years and 2 months. And back then, a few governments and non-governmental organizations and international organizations gathered together and created what is today this union that at that time and even today promised to build a better world. The IUCN was founded in France, a country that was only just starting to, at that time, to re-emerge from the ashes of the World War II. And our mission back then was continue to drive from strength to strength across the decades. Today, IUCN has more than 1,400 members, 16,000 experts within 7 commissions, 1,000 staff members, and offices in 69 countries around the world. So as you can see, we are this vast network of people who believe in a better future. As we work in many domains, from seas and to forests to species to indigenous rights, we all join in wanting this vision of a better planet for all. We are a diverse union, and that is strong because we all strive towards one common goal, achieving a just world that values and conserves nature. The vision has taken us from 1948 till this very moment, where I stand here in front of all of you in Dubai. And as we all know, this is a very important COP. The effects of climate change are being felt all across the world, within 2023 currently on track to be the warmest year on record. And as we can see all around us, people and nature are suffering tremendously from the impact of climate change. Yet, we are nowhere close to where we need to be in addressing this problem, with global greenhouse gas emissions continuing to rise. The latest analysis showed that even if countries fully implement all the unconditional commitments that they have made under the Paris Agreement, the planet's temperature remains on track to rise by 3 degrees Celsius by the end of the century. This COP28 is especially important as it will conclude the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, which will confirm the progress we have actually made since that momentous milestone. This provides the opportunity to raise our collective ambitions and to emphasize the need for bolder collaboration and action. This COP, therefore, provides the chance to take stock and correct course and to raise collective ambition on all fronts to keep the goal of 1.5 degrees Celsius alive. But let me say a few words about what we're going to do this afternoon in this side event. We have very committed people, all of you here, and you're going to hear from our commission chairs, three commissions, and from one of our experts, Dr. Sandeep Sesgulpa, who is the IUCN Global Policy Lead on Climate Change. Let me express my thanks to the leaders of the 3 IUCN commissions who have vast experience and knowledge of working on climate change from different perspectives. We will hear from them on what their expectations from COP28 are, especially on nature and climate, and what they think a good outcome from Dubai will be. So let me check with you a little bit about each of them. First, we will hear from Manuel Pulgar Vidal. Bienvenido, Manuel. Manuel is the chair of the IUCN Climate Crisis Commission. He is also WWF Global Leader on Climate and Energy. Formerly, he was the Peruvian Minister of Environment and the President of COP20. And now Manuel is also serving on the advisory committee for COP28 set up by the UAE presidency. Next, we will have Professor Christina Boyd, who chairs the IUCN World Commission on Environmental Law, and who is also a climate negotiator and legal advisor for Norway. Christina is a professor of international law at the University of Oslo and also serves as a co-chair of the Paris Agreement Implementation and Compliance Committee. Welcome, Christina. Last and most definitely very welcome, we have Kristen Walker, Chair of the IUCN Commission on Environmental, Economic and Social Policy. Kristen, who is also Senior Vice President at Conservation International, has been actively involved in advancing the rights and concerns of indigenous peoples on climate change, including in the UNFCCC Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform. Through these different perspectives from international renowned leaders and experts, it is our hope that by the end of this session, you will leave inspired. Inspired not just because you will have learned something new about what the world must do to tackle the challenges ahead of us, but inspired because you will leave realizing that all stakeholders have a crucial role to play, and that includes you, me, and all of us. And of course, I see here many members of indigenous peoples community, so welcome. And you too, because you are key in this journey. With this, I am very pleased to invite Sandeep to tell us more about IUCN key messages. Thank you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Gretel. First of all, I can see that there are some colleagues standing at the back. There's seating room here, so please feel free to come forward and sit in the front. Yeah, don't be shy. All right, so I think, we have already heard from Gretel the importance of this COP, and what I'm going to try and do in the next 15 minutes or so is present the key messages that IUCN has for COP28. Next slide, please. Oh, actually, I've got this. I can use this. So for COP28, IUCN has 10 important key messages for the parties. But before we get into the substance of the messages itself, let me quickly take you through the process that we followed to arrive at our position paper, to arrive at these messages. So our position paper was developed by the IUCN COP28 working group, which included members of the council, including commission chairs, and also various colleagues across the secretariat. It also incorporated feedback from each of the 7 IUCN commissions. Once the draft was prepared, it was reviewed and approved by the IUCN's Council's Program and Policy Committee. It was reviewed also by the Bureau before it was finally endorsed and signed by the Director General. And we launched this position paper in September in all 3 IUCN languages ahead of the UN General Assembly High-Level Week and at the UN Climate Action Summit that was convened by the Secretary General in New York in September. So what is the context within which we develop these messages? As all of you will know, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, finalized its 6th assessment cycle reports this year, with the adoption of the synthesis report of the 6th assessment cycle and the summary for policymakers of the same. And what the report really brings out very clearly is the fact that there are widespread adverse impacts and increasing losses and damages that are being faced both by nature and by people from climate change today. And these adverse impacts are across all sectors, across all ecosystem types, and across all geographies. The second important context that informed our position paper was the fact, again, this is something that all of you will now know, is that this year will mark, and this COP in particular, will mark the conclusion of the first global stocktake of the Paris Agreement, where parties come together to take collective stock of the progress that has been made to date in achieving the long-term goals of the Paris Agreement and to determine the next steps on increasing future ambition. So you also see on the screen the actual position paper itself, and it's available for those of you who would like to download it. It's available on the IUCN website and the dedicated web page we have for COP28, so iucn.org/COP28 in all the 3 IUCN languages. So moving on to the substance of our position paper, the first key message of our position paper was that in order to address the climate challenge, what is really required are deep and sustained emission reductions across all sectors of the global economy today, including the time-bound phase-out of all fossil fuels, including oil and gas, as well as fossil fuel subsidies, in order to limit warming to 1.5 degrees centigrades, and importantly, within a framework of a just transition. We know that the current temperature rise has already increased by over 1.1 degrees above pre-industrial levels. The IPCC 6th assessment report also tells us that global greenhouse gas emissions must reduce by 43% by 2030 from 2019 levels to keep the 1.5 degree goal alive. And if we look at the latest NDC synthesis report that the UNFCCC Secretariat just published last month, what that shows us is that if all the NDCs, if all the national pledges that countries have made to date are put together, then that will lead to an emission reduction of only around 2% below 2019 levels by 2030. So you can see the vast gap that exists between where we are now and where we need to be. And why is achieving the 1.5 degree guardrail important? It is important, among other things, because it is critical. It will be critical for the temperature rise not to exceed that threshold in order to maintain critical ecosystem services that, that the planet provides, and also for minimizing the climate-related losses and damages that we are all witnessing today. And you can see, on the chart, the real gap that needs to be bridged. The second key message that we have in our position paper is, of course, focused on the global stocktake. And our view is that the global stocktake should deliver strong and clear outputs at COP28 that result in more ambitious NDCs in 2025. And the GST, the global stocktake, as we all know, has a critical function to play in the Paris Agreement. It functions as a ratchet-up mechanism that is meant to increase overall ambition at 5-yearly intervals. And it is really important in our view that the decisions or the declarations that come from COP28 on the global stocktake lead to parties increasing their ambition, both on climate finance, so both on mitigation and adaptation, but also on support and particularly finance in the next round of NDC. And on our side, as IUCN, we have been engaged in each of the 3 phases of the global stocktake that have occurred so far, the data collection and preparation phase that was started in Glasgow, through to the technical assessment phase that happened over the last 18 months. And now what we have reached at COP28 is the political phase where the consideration of outputs will need to be finalized by parties. The third key message that we emphasize in our position paper is really a strong reinforcement of the interlinkages between the climate and the biodiversity crisis, the role of nature-based solutions, and the need to achieve greater synergies across all the 3 Rio conventions. At COP27, the parties recognized the interlinked nature of the crisis, of both crises, the crisis of climate change and the crisis of biodiversity loss, as well as the vital importance of nature and ecosystems for effective climate action. And building on these decisions, we very much hope that the key decisions at COP28 will also reinforce and aim to build on what was agreed on in COP27 and include, in particular, find reflection in the decisions on the global stocktake, the mitigation work program, the Glasgow to Sharm el-Sheikh global goal on the adaptation work program, for example. And in our view, nature-based solutions provide immediate and near-term benefits for both mitigation and adaptation, while also supporting biodiversity conservation and sustainable goals. And on this chart, you will actually see some of the benefits that nature-based solutions can provide from a mitigation point of view. But it is important to emphasize that it's not just mitigation alone. It also provides a range of adaptation and other benefits. The fourth message is a pretty simple one, in that we would like parties to reflect their highest levels of ambition in developing their future NDCs, including by incorporating concrete and ambitious nature-based solutions within them. And here again, at COP27, parties were explicitly encouraged to do so to do so and achieve the goals of the agreement. And the latest available analysis that our colleagues at Oxford University have shown indicates that around 40% of the 122 new NDCs, so around 50 countries, have explicitly referenced nature-based solutions so far. But in our view, many more countries can do the same, and there is an opportunity for parties to also include these nature-based solutions in their national adaptation plans and long-term strategies under the Paris Agreement. The fifth message focuses on the need for greater global climate finance across the entire continuum of mitigation, adaptation, and loss and damage, with an increased direct access for indigenous peoples and local communities. In our view, the world needs to urgently meet the currently agreed climate financing goal of mobilizing $100 billion per year by 2020, but we would also like to see meaningful progress being made on the new collective quantified goal on future climate finance from the floor of $100 billion per year. We also know that there is a big gap between mitigation financing and adaptation financing, and we would like a rapid increase in adaptation financing to achieve a balance between the two. We are also calling for a rapid operationalization of the new funding arrangements for loss and damage that were agreed on at COP27. And insofar as nature-based solutions itself are concerned, what again the latest analysis shows is the fact that investments in nature-based solutions need to increase by 3 times by 2030 and by 4-fold by 2050 if the collective goals of all the 3 Rio Conventions are to be made. And we particularly call for increasing climate funding for indigenous peoples and local communities who receive less than 1% of climate financing at the moment. On the implementation of nature-based solutions itself, we believe that the implementation of nature-based solutions needs to be done in a high-integrity manner through the application of the IUCN global standard for nature-based solutions, whether it's through market-based mechanisms or non-market-based mechanisms. And here again, our global standard offers 8 criteria and 28 indicators that can enable the coherent design, execution, and evaluation of these projects. At the same time, we emphasize that nature-based solutions must not be used as a substitute or as a means to postpone or delay ambitious emission reduction efforts. We also argue that the use of nature-based solutions for offsetting purposes should be done only to compensate for residual emissions that cannot otherwise be abated through emission reduction efforts. And in general, insofar as market-based mechanisms are concerned, we call for the maintenance of the highest levels of environmental and ecosystem integrity in the operationalization of Article 6 of the Paris Agreement and the need for robust accounting systems across the board. Our 7th message calls for the accelerated and responsible deployment of renewable energy systems in a manner that ensures a just transition and has net positive impacts for biodiversity. The last IPBES IPCC joint report in 2021 made the point that some of the mitigation measures that are being undertaken could have negative impacts on biodiversity, and therefore they needed to be evaluated in terms of their overall benefits and risks. And it is also important in our view that any such transition be done in a just manner so as to avoid any detrimental impacts on vulnerable communities, ecosystems, and species, and also aligned with the goals of the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. And you find here some examples of the work that IUCN has already done to help mitigate the biodiversity impacts associated with solar and wind energy development, for example. Our eighth message focuses on the need for avoiding the 1.5 degrees centigrade overshoot, and also, importantly, avoiding any reliance on unproven, untested, or unregulated geoengineering technologies to reach the net zero goals. And here again, the dangers of overshooting 1.5 are increasingly clear, including through the work of the IPCC and other experts who point, for example, to some of the irreversible impacts that crossing 1.5 would entail, including the triggering of tipping points. And in our view, therefore, it is important that a precautionary approach be taken with respect to any use of geoengineering, given the very high risks that these technologies include. In particular, for example, the moral hazard of delaying emission reductions, or the social and environmental risks that they entail, and importantly, the various unresolved issues around ethics, consent, equity, and governance. The ninth message in particular focuses on climate policy and action to be equitable and inclusive, focusing on the needs, priorities of the most vulnerable. And here again, we draw on the work on the local communities and indigenous peoples platform and call for mainstreaming gender responsive climate policy. And this is my final slide, where we actually also call for ambitious action from non-party stakeholders, including the private sector and civil society, in addressing the climate biodiversity challenges and in supporting a just transition. And in particular, we welcome the work of the Marrakesh Partnership, including, the work of the climate champions. As all of you will know, Razan Al-Mubarak is also the president of IUCN, in addition to being the UAE's high-level champion. And we very much support the nature-related work that is being done through this partnership. So I'll just stop it here and hand it back to you, Gretel. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep, very much. Well, music is fine, but not at this time. So let me now give the floor to our commission chairs and experts to share your views about IUCN position. We have been working together to construct this position, and of course we want to hear from you. Let me start with Professor Boyd. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure being here, and congratulations to the team behind this effort for making a pavilion happen for the IUCN, being the home of the Union. It's fantastic to have that meeting space for all of us and for everyone interested in nature and climate connections. Well, Greta, your question initially was, what would be a successful COP, right? What would be a good outcome from Dubai in the context of nature-based solutions, in the context of nature? And I have three brief comments to make. The first one is maybe where you, Sandeep, started off at the very tail end. I think if there is an agreement, or can an agreement be reached at this COP to phase out fossil fuels, that would be an amazing step forwards. We have, of course, a phasing down of unabated fossil fuels from Glasgow, repeated last year, but that's where it's stuck in a way. The discussions, and we've heard the president talking at the opening plenary earlier this afternoon about the possibility of such an agreement. I think that would be one very important signal. And it's important for nature-based solutions. As you rightly said, nature-based solutions should not and cannot be used as an offset for fossil fuel-based emissions. They need to come in addition to very drastic reductions of greenhouse gas emissions. And if at all offset, then it's only to offset hard-to-abate emissions that otherwise cannot be reduced. But being offsets for fossil fuels-based emission, I think that's a no-go, and we were very clear about this in the position paper. So I think that would be a first determinant for a successful COP, an agreement on phasing out fossil fuels. The second one, I think very, very important, is a successful outcome and a very robust decision on the global stocktake. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, of course, it's the first time we get a decision on the global stocktake, because it's the first time it took place over the course of the last 2 years. But the second reason is that the global stocktake plays a very important role. We all know that parties' NDCs are not sufficient yet. We've heard this many times. But this is the whole rationale for the Paris Agreement, is in iterative moments, regular moments, getting parties together and increase collectively their level of ambition through successive rounds of NDCs, nationally determined contributions. And the next time that matters is in 2025. So a global stocktake will always take place 2 years prior the next round of NDCs and informs the next round of informs parties in raising their ambition on mitigation, on adaptation, and on finance. And for that reason, it is so important to get it right the first time, because it's a precedent for things that will come time and time and time again every 5 years when we have a global stocktake. And it's not just the language in a global stocktake, it's also the linkage then to informing parties' actions thereafter. And that's going to be difficult. We know that already. That's going to be difficult negotiations, but it's important because in 2025, NDCs have to progress to the level of highest possible ambition. And the third point, very briefly, in terms of nature recognition, role of nature in this from this COP, is in a way to operationalize the recognitions from the last COP and the previous COP about the role of nature. There are recognitions from last year, for example, that look at the interlinkages of biodiversity and climate change crisis. It's very important language that came into the cover decision from Sharm el-Sheikh last year, and the role of nature-based solutions. First time ever that nature-based solutions were mentioned in a decision. But they have to be operationalized. They have to find their way into the workings of parties, into other streams of negotiations, into, for example, the global stocktake, of course, but also the mitigation work program. One idea could be to have a global dialogue next year on the role of nature and nature-based solution in climate change adaptation and mitigation. It also needs to find its way into the work on the global goal on adaptation and on finance, so that they are finding their way into these streams of work for parties that matter and do not remain an isolated mentioning in the overarching decision. So I think if that happens, that would be another point of a successful COP. I leave those 3 issues and the floor back to you, Gretel.
Thank you very much, Cristina. Let me now go to Manuel Pulgar. Manuel, the floor is yours. If you can reflect, you have a lot of experience in COPs. You organize one yourself, and I know that you have been part of everything that is going on here. So what are your views, Manuel?
Good. Thank you, Gretel, and thank you to you all. Thank you, Sandeep, for the presentation. This document, these 10 messages are really comprehensive, are covering what we as IUCN expect must be achieved in this COP28. And let me start, before of sharing my reflections because of these messages, share with you the first message, that it is the title of the podium, Home of the Union. The idea of this pavilion, it is to be the home for everybody. No? And home is home. Home is the place in which we are used to coming back after a busy day, to get that warm atmosphere of the family, of home. So feel as in home. Come back here every time, every day in these 2 weeks, to share knowledge, to collaborate, to cooperate, to move things forward, and to make, we hope, this COP a successful one. So I am not planning to repeat what Sandeep has already mentioned. So I will try to frame the messages in some key ideas that I hope could be useful for everybody to define how to measure success of this COP. What are those key messages that we have to keep in mind as a way to push the process forward and to get progress? Because the idea of a COP, it is to get progress, to move the process forward, to move into the next COP with a lot of hope, enthusiasm, that we can do it even better. So I have 6 main ideas. The first idea, it is Clearly, we are not on track. We are strongly behind on what we thought it would be for the current time. And why it is important to recognize that? For many reasons. First, the synthesis report of the Secretariat, the synthesis report of the technical dialogue of the GST, all the information because of many organizations, including IUCN, it is telling us we are not on track. We are not doing what we have to do, what we must do. And why this is important? Because Christina, in some way, have already mentioned it. It is because the global stocktake, it is a key element of the current COP. Because sometimes people is thinking that the global stocktake, it is just a balance, no? And where we are in relation to the process. For sure, it is important to recognize where we are, but probably the only thing that we can get, if we think that that is the only objective, it is something that we knew. No, we are not in which we have to be, clearly. The point of the global stocktake, it is that if we can't get a good outcome, we will repeat the same. And we will lose 5 years. Because the global stocktake, it is to give recommendations to the next cycle of the process. The next cycle of the process starts in 2025. It is the time in which countries, again, have to put on the table their new NDCs. And the only way to have good NDCs or better NDCs in the next cycle, it is by having a good outcome with a strong recommendation, with mandatory rules for the next cycle. That is the only way. So let's push the process to get a strong global stocktake. We don't know yet what negotiators are going to discuss and negotiate, because they are coming with 2 background documents, the synthesis report of the technical dialogue, and one document that it is called Views on Elements for the Global Stocktake. But we know that they are preparing a draft 0, that it must be ready by the mid of this COP, so probably for next Monday, Tuesday, that will be the negotiating text for the outcome. So if you have something to suggest, something to say, call your negotiator, call the negotiator of your own country and suggest them what it must be said in that outcome of the global stocktake. Because we are not on track, and we have to put the word on track. We have to move this process forward in an urgent way. The second key message, it is that we have to walk the transitions. Remember that some years ago, probably 3 years ago or a bit more, IPCC told us the only way to get to the decisive decade, to the net zero and to the 1.5, it is by walking 4 transitions. The energy one, the industry, the cities and infrastructure, and the land, agriculture, and forest one. So those are the 4 key transitions that we have to walk. And why I am referring to this? Because it is clear that the most important transition to walk, it is the energy one. And that means the package of the energy transition. And the package, it is the phasing out of fossil fuels, an urgent decision. It is to increase renewable energy facilities, that is the second, and to increase energy efficiency. That is the third element of the package. And all of this framed in a just transition. So that is the way to understand well the energy transition package. But to have that, we do need to get a strong political statement for the phasing out of fossil fuel. We know that in some way, that statement, that decision could frame the success of the current COP. The world is looking for a strong political statement for phasing out fossil fuels. We cannot wait more. That is key. So let's push negotiators, let's push the presidency to move towards that, to really get a strong statement for the phasing out of fossil fuels. That moves me to the third idea, that it is people is losing credibility in the process, and that is not good for the process. Remember, 7 years ago, 8 years ago, we were all together putting all of our efforts towards an agreement, and we did it. We got it by working collectively. Now we are losing hope of the process. We are losing hope in the multilateral process. We are losing hope in the net zero because we haven't yet completed all the pending tasks to have a clear net zero concept. So we have to continue working on that. That is why the Secretary General in Glasgow, 2 COPs ago, he was telling we have to move this system from voluntary basis to regulated one, because we do need to make this more mandatory, more enforceable. And also we have to avoid greenwashing and all those kind of bad climate claims that are affecting the system. So that is also a key message that it is reflecting what we as IUCN are suggesting to the world. The fourth message, this is the time for convergence, and Gretel has already mentioned it. It is the time to connect our climate objective in this decisive decade with our nature objective, mostly based in the recently adopted Global Biodiversity Framework. Remember, friends, 30 for 30 sounds as a number, but the first 30, it is a year, and the second 30, it is coverage. And to get to 2030, it is just 6 years. It's nothing. And to get 30% of coverage means to expand 10 points of coverage. And that is a lot of effort. That means to recognize all the effort of the indigenous peoples working in conservation. That means to recognize rights. That means to recognize all the effort in conservation by different organizations as IUCN, among many others. So we have to promote that convergence. And Christina has already mentioned nature-based solutions. That is our low-hanging fruit, because it is a tool that can connect our effort on intervening in a sustainable way on nature to also produce and promote an outcome that can address climate change in mitigation, adaptation, food security, water security, among many other challenges that the planet it is currently facing. But nature-based solutions, it is the first. We have to continue exploring on some complementary instruments. What can we do to connect the NDCs that are the climate plans with the NBSAPs that are the biodiversity plans? That is the idea of this convergence message. That moves me to the fifth one, probably the most missing one. This is a moral process, and we are forgetting that. This is moral. We have to bring ethics to the process, because this is not about calculations. No, I calculate if I do this, no. This is a moral, because we know how much the planet and how much the poorest people of the world is suffering. It is clear. Fortunately, Antonio Guterres is raising that message. Fortunately, the Pope wrote this last letter because of the climate crisis. They are bringing this moral approach to the debate, because it is needed. This is not just to calculate how much my economy could suffer if we phase out the fossil fuels. No, it is how much we are affecting people. No, it is about the planet and it is about people. So the ethic, it is a message that I hope that gradually could come back to the discussion, that it is key. And finally, it is about equity. So ethic and equity. And that is why we have to talk about vulnerability. And we know how small, how tiny the adaptation fund it is. We know how important it is to have the loss and damage funding mechanism operating well. Because, and this is not my phrase, it is somebody, Adil Najam, who mentioned some hours ago, the problem it is that who is paying loss and damage, it is people. It is the poorest people. They are paying immediately. As soon as they lose something, they are paying. So we have to have a good mechanism that can really quickly, with flexibility and with agility, allocate resources to help to recover those kind of damages and loss. So it is important to recognize that because of the equity principle. And for sure, just transition, something that it was mentioned by Sandeep. So let's bring these messages and communicate it. Let's share it within this venue to make negotiators, to make actors know that this is urgent, that we are in a state of emergency and that we have to act very soon. Thank you.
Kristen, now the floor is yours. I think that it linked very well with what Manuel just said about ethics and equity. And we know that you have a lot of experience working with people all around the world, local communities, indigenous peoples. So what is your view of the situation?
Well, first, I want to highlight about the historic decision that was just made in the plenary about the adoption and the operationalization of the loss and damage fund or climate impact fund. I think that's still under debate, and the potential for $500 million, which clearly is not enough, but it does look at those issues of the impacts of what's happening to those communities. I first want to acknowledge the indigenous leadership we have in the room, and I would love all of our indigenous leaders to stand up because they've already been here for an entire week. If you could all stand up, our indigenous leaders, si pueden parar, los líderes indígenas que están aquí. They have already been here for a week in the facilitative working group for the local communities and indigenous peoples platform. And that's in a 3-year process, again, to work on the work plan. And I think the big question is how do, you can all sit down, sorry. Wait a second. But I think the question is they've been working really hard to put that platform together and to move it, but how do you engage governments? How do you have more active involvement of governments in the platform and financing for that platform? But also supporting indigenous peoples, women, and youth in providing more evidence to that. So more resources have to go to communities to support those efforts. But governments need to engage in these processes to move those forward. We also have to look at the larger issue of data and data inclusion, how you look at collecting data, whether it's for youth, women, environment, and how you monitor that and bring those efforts together. We also need to recognize the Indigenous Caucus here at this COP is over 300 Indigenous leaders. It has been growing. I don't know the numbers for the Gender Caucus, but that is also big, and youth is growing. And I think as we talk about the issues of equity, who's at the forefront of climate, we cannot forget who are those voices. And therefore, the decisions and the agenda needs to be pushed so that we get those decisions made at this COP. But that we also have a good global stocktake that moves that forward. But the voices of communities and leaders on the ground need to be present. Their information and their data needs to be present, and they need to be at the table when it comes to decision making. And on top of that, there needs to be greater direct access to those resources. When we're looking at those areas that are most under threat, that the communities that are most under threat in terms of the impacts of climate change or loss and damage, we're looking at whole communities who may have to leave their island nations, who may have to leave their communities due to the impacts of climate change. And that's where the moral discussion is and decision. How do we support those efforts? How do we move them forward? But how do we make the right decisions as a collective and work together to do that? And I think that's the fundamental question, and that's the voice that we need to move forward in this discussion. There is a lot of work being done, and there have been more path roads open in this COP for Indigenous participation and youth participation to engage in the various dialogues here. What has to happen is that we need to provide that support in terms of how you bring the language to the table, how you bring the data to the table. And I think collectively, not all governments are prepared to come to the negotiating table, not all NGOs are, and not all Indigenous peoples are. It's a different language we speak. And how do you help support leveling the playing field in those discussions and making sure as those pathways open up for more inclusion that those actors are supported, have the right tools to enter into those discussions, but also bring their voice and their knowledge to that table. And I think these are the elements as we cross this path that we've walked, as we look at the IUCN policy, as we look at IUCN's 1,400 members, governments, NGOs, and Indigenous peoples organizations. We need to work together to push that agenda. We need to work with the governments that are members of IUCN, but also across those NGOs. So I'll leave my comments there.
Thank you. Thank you, Kristen. And so we have a few minutes for some questions. So I'm gonna take 2 or 3 quick questions. Please be brief with your questions, and I'm gonna start. Yes, you. Thank you. I'm going to take two more. Yes, please.
Thank you. Fiona Ryan from Forest Development and Climate. It seems to me that whenever they talk about emissions, people tend to forget about emissions from deforestation, and it wasn't mentioned here. And I think from a biodiversity perspective, the IPBES has stated that habitat destruction, including deforestation, is the major cause of biodiversity loss currently. I mean, it could be surpassed by climate change in the near future. But anyway, that's the latest figures I've seen. And so stopping deforestation is really an emissions reduction thing. So it's not really an offset when it's against other fossil fuel reductions. So by reducing coal and increasing gas, that's not really an offset either. I think, yeah, so I'm just thinking, where's the funding for emissions reductions going to come from in forests? It's 9% of global emissions or 11%, depending on who you talk to. So, and we can't meet the 2-degree target without forests.
Thank you. Yes, please.
Hello everyone, my name is Agnes Leina. I just want to say thank you everybody for the presentations that you made, and thank you Greta. I just have one question. At the moment, even in this COP, as we do the stock taking and all that, there is I would say a new scramble for indigenous people's land everywhere in the whole world. We're talking about carbon market and carbon credits. What is the stand of IUCN on that? Because to be honest with you, at the moment in Kenya, because of carbon credits and carbon market, people have been evicted in Mau forests, and it has also happened already in Tanzania. So much as we are looking for, you know, a positive aspect here, we don't know what will happen, especially on indigenous people, as you were talking about the moral side of it. Thank you very much, Greta.
Thank you. Let us, you need to leave, Manuel? Okay, okay, yes. Okay. Let me give you the floor first, and then you can leave. Yes.
And probably I will connect the three, because are strongly connected. I think that in some way wetlands has gotten a strong recognition when we think about nature-based solutions, because wetlands are a key ecosystem, no, that well managed could fulfill a key role in addressing all those challenges as climate, water security, food security, and all what I've already mentioned. But to do that, and fortunately we have gotten good political traction in relation to MBS because of the UNEA 5 resolution in February of 2022, no? And then CBD plus UNFCCC. But that is not enough, and that is why Sandeep in some way mentioned, well, that we have to follow standards. Because it is by following standards that we can secure some things. Let me be more clear. When I think in MBS, following the IUCN standards, immediately I imagine three main values. The first one, it is that if you are planning to make an intervention on nature, it must be clear that you are trying to do that to address a well-documented and urgent societal challenge. That it could be adaptation, mitigation, food security, water security. So you are contributing. That is why it is called nature-based solutions. But the second, it is even more important. The second value, it is that you have to secure ecosystem integrity and ecosystem services integrity. That is key. And that is why we have clarity that not every intervention on nature, it is an MBS. Because if you are planning to plant trees by affecting the diversity of the forest, that is not MBS, clearly, because you are affecting the integrity of the ecosystem and the ecosystem services. So that is a key element. And that moves me to the third, that it must provide social benefits and it must respect rights and it must be developed with and by the people. So those are the three main values. So if we are able to do that, wetlands will continue getting the traction that in your question it is clear you are looking for. That moves me to the second and third question. Yeah, it is difficult because we have tried for years in trying to give value to forests, no, as a way to avoid deforestation. You remember for how long time we have discussed payment for ecosystem services, no, as a way to see how much by doing that, no, we could avoid deforestation. Then we move into RED and RED Plus, no, and then to the markets, no, and unfortunately, any of those mechanisms show to be effective in giving that value to forests. And we hope that probably because of the discussion on what it is called the Article 6, the idea of jurisdictional approach, no, and also the idea of high quality, high integrity intervention, we can secure a bit more. But also it is clear that we have to reform the financial system because we have to secure ways to mobilize those resources. If not, we will be exactly in the same for years. And in relation to your question of carbon market, it is clear that we are fully against offsetting and greenwashing because our main priority, and again, that is clear in our messages, it is for a real and quick decarbonization. And that must be because of technology change, investment in that technology, innovation, and not by using alternative systems that it could be used as a greenwashing system. So those are key elements in relation to what you are asking us. And I am going to skip in silence, but thank you for that.
Thank you, Manuel. Let me now pass the floor to Professor Boy, Cristina, for your final remarks in addressing some of the questions.
Well, Manuel has already addressed them quite comprehensively, but I just wanted to highlight two elements here. If you have a look at the Paris Agreement, you will see that it is basically neutral in terms of where emissions come from. It is sector neutral, except for forests and wetlands and ocean ecosystem. They're all mentioned in Article 5, which is, has particular history, but we have one particular article that is dedicated for exactly protecting wetlands and forests as things and as removals. But it has never been operationalized in any particular way, but it does give guidance to what parties include in their NDC. Now, Manuel already talked about RED+, and what we did, or what we do have with respect to RED+, are safeguards, social and environmental safeguards, and they were negotiated with very, very strong involvement of the indigenous caucus back about 10, 15 years ago. What we do not have with regard to Article 6 are safeguards. There are no safeguards yet there. And I think it is very important to raise the same voices and the same concerns that were raised back then in Copenhagen and the year after when it came to RED+, to push for these same strong safeguards with respect to Article 6, Article 6.2 and Article 6.4. There are hooks there already in the decision that safeguards need to be elaborated, but they're not there yet. And I used to be the RED+ negotiator for Norway, so I was very much involved in RED+ negotiation, but I don't see the same kind of involvement and push happening right now. And that may lead to these kinds of situations that you're experiencing once carbon markets take off. We don't have the safeguards in place to avoid displacement of indigenous peoples, to avoid plantations and all these negative biodiversity effects that we try to avoid when it came to RED+. So I think there is a legacy here and lessons learned that need to be reinvigorated, I think, and applied also in the context of carbon markets, because that's what really matters and will become very important.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Kristen?
I think I would just echo what Cristina said about Article 6 and the need for safeguards. So I don't want to belabor that, and I know we're on a time crunch at the moment, but I think that's the case. I think the voices here are the best voices to be able to push that forward in those issues.
Sandeep?
Thank you, Gretel. So one, maybe just building on the quick point that Christina made, I mean, the problem with the voluntary sector is that it's a bit of a wild, wild west at the moment. You have different schemes, different standards, different degrees of quality in their implementation. And what really ultimately needs to happen is you need to have all of these voluntary mechanisms aligned and, in a sense, be made regulatory as part of the official compliance system under Article 6 of the Paris Agreement. And I echo what Manuel said some time back. He sort of reinforced the message from the UN Secretary General that really emphasized the need for these voluntary systems and in any use of market-based mechanisms to achieve, to be the highest integrity as possible. And that's a really important need for us as an entire community to ensure. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandeep, and thank you all. Let me just close with a few remarks. And let me recognize also the fourth chair of the Commission on Education and Communication, who is there, Sean Soti. And I would like to start by something that Sean always have very close to his heart, and is education. I think that education is a big part of all of this. And if we don't start with our little boys and girls talking about, what is a healthy planet, then we will not change the course of this situation. We really have to change. We really need a big transformation, and that includes all of us. So education, in my view, still is key in all this new path that we want to take. But the speakers today, the brilliant speakers today, have talked about many things. I think that it was very compelling to hear Manuel starting saying, we're not on track. I think that, that is a very strong thing to say, and a very real one too. And also, the IUCN position is very clear. I'm very proud as a Director General to have this position and stand, very strongly behind this position, because first of all, the position was done together with the experts, with the chairs of commissions, with members, with the council, and it's very clear. We are not, IUCN is not in the middle. IUCN is taking position. We are saying phasing out fossil fuels, and that is clear. We are not in the middle. We don't have a different discourse. So, and I think that is a really big change for IUCN. We normally try to be these conveners and neutral, we used to say. Well, my news to you is that we are not neutral anymore. We are taking a clear side with our position, and I invite you to reread it and to help us spread the word, because we are a union, 1,400 members and counting, including state members, including indigenous peoples who are here. And so we have this immense force, the force of a union, to try to push things in a different way. And I wanted to say that many of the speakers also talk about, Christina and particularly, talk about the power of the NDCs and the need to have stronger actions around NDCs and to strengthen the actions of the countries, but also of the people around NDC. We also heard about that we need to increase our collective, and I think that word is very important, collective ambitions. And of course, we heard about nature and climate change, and I like something that I think Christina also said, which is that we need to make this operational. It's a very nice sentence, but we really have to speak about the how. The how. Yes, the how is nature-based solutions, but the how is also much more. So I'm really glad, Christina, that you touch on that, on the role of nature and making nature and climate change, just one coin, but at the same time we need to make it operational. And of course, ethics, equity, working with all partners around, and what Kristen clearly stated about direct access to resources for indigenous peoples is key. IUCN is strongly with all of you, indigenous peoples, that are asking for direct access to resources. We in IUCN truly believe that this needs to happen, and you will be hearing me speaking about this in many of the events that I will be participating. And of course, as also Kristen mentioned, I mean, we definitely have an opportunity now with more indigenous peoples coming, more gender focus also, the power of women. We women are very important in these conversations. I think that women bring a different perspective. We do. We bring a different perspective, no matter where we are, no matter if we are in a community, no matter if we are sitting here in a panel. No, we bring our own views, and I think that is important. And of course, the power of youth. I mean, that is, and I see many here too. So that is something important, because for me, it's not, and for IUCN, it's not what we need to tell youth to do, but it's more what youth can teach us. And I think that is very powerful, because now this new generation come with a different drive. You have different ideas, and you want to be part of, and you are part of. And I think that is what we need to recognize. So I'm very glad to see many of you here with us today. Let me just close this session. I'm very glad that we have a full house, because this is our first event of out of 80. So please stay with us. Come to our pavilion. We're gonna have 12 receptions. So if you wonder where you have to go at night, come here. And if you wonder where you need to come for a fantastic event, come to this pavilion. We will be waiting for all of you. So thank you very much. Thank you to our incredible speakers, and thank you all for coming.